I would say that on behalf of Gitika Trust, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Chulanee Attanayake to this session. And I understand that Dr. Attanayake is a research fellow in the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore National University. Formerly, she was also a research fellow, I'm sorry, not research fellow, but director research in the Institute of Security Studies, Ministry of Defense Affairs, Sri Lanka, where she worked closely with the ministry in establishing strategic goals and creating plans for broad-scale research on national and international security. She's also the recipient of the Excellent Doctoral Dissertation Award 2017, School of Politics and International Studies, Central China Normal University. She has been a visiting lecturer to Royal Institute of Colombo, affiliated with University of London. Chulanee has several publications in her account, and I deeply appreciate in particular Maritime Sri Lanka, Historical and Contemporary Perspectives 2021. I've personally gone through that. Okay. Her invited lectures and presentations in conferences, both national and international, is long listed. To sum up, she's a researcher, lecturer, mentor, and policy analyst with over 10 years of experience. So over to Dr. Chulanee Attanayake.
Thank you, Sujata. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope I'll be able to give some perspective on the topic. So as I said in the beginning also, let's have this more interactive rather than me talking long hours. This is a topic which is very close to my heart. I think I have been working longest on this project, on this topic in particular, how China-India competition is playing out in the Indian Ocean region and how it is particularly affecting Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's foreign policy decisions, strategic decisions, etc. Now, to begin with, I think the audience is not very surprised about the interaction between China and India. So I would not go in that direction. Just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight is the fact that how India concerns Indian Ocean as India's ocean, where in certain places the strategic analysts have mentioned this in particular, which is very interesting. And how after a long hiatus, centuries of hiatus, China has suddenly decided that it also wants to play a role in the Indian Ocean region. Now, these two factors are very important for how China and India see Sri Lanka and how Sri Lanka is engaging with India and China. Now, as we already know, Sri Lanka is situated in the strategic sea lanes of communication in the Indian Ocean region. We are situated right at the center. So we know that the Earth is a globe that the way that we draw the map is hypothetical. We are not, I mean, that's what we think that it looks like. But for instance, what I want to say, if you turn the globe upside down, you would see like Sri Lanka is right at the center and at the top, that there's nothing in between. So that shows the importance of, even though we are a small country, because of this very reason, Sri Lanka has always had to play beyond its weight. And it has always been an attraction for every great power throughout the great power competitions in the history. That's why the Portuguese, the Dutch came to Sri Lanka, the same reason why British colonized Sri Lanka. And also like they managed to hold military sort of like presence for a longer period of time. Until 1970s, Sri Lanka had a defense agreement with the United Kingdom. So they all speak to the very same reason. Sri Lanka, by like without any question, is a very strategically located small island state. In international systems, there like great powers gain a lot of attention. Small countries are placed within the great power politics and great power dialogue. But if a small country is strategically located, those countries get comparatively much more attention in the international arena. So that's what Sri Lanka is gaining at the moment. Now, having said that, um, uh, so the competition between China and India is for obviously several reasons. One, Indian Ocean is India's strategic backyard, and its immediate geography. It is also greatly dependent on the sea lanes of communication for its trade and other raw material needs. Similarly, for China, even though it is staying somewhat far away from the Indian Ocean region, Indian Ocean is very important because most of its raw materials are coming from Africa and Middle East. So, and then we know that there's a great play between United States and China brewing competition in the region. So China is always anxious that the sea lanes of communication will get disrupted. If that happens, then their trade and economy will be affected. So all these things plays an important role of what I'm going to talk about. Coming back to Sri Lanka's relationship with China and India. Now, interestingly, Sri Lanka has historical relations with both these countries. India, of course, it's Sri Lanka's immediate neighborhood, and we share a strong cultural bond. Our history is strongly related to Aryan history in India. Buddhism came from India. There has been multiple interactions in terms of culture, art, people to people partnership for centuries, and it continues with India. With China, we do not have that strong cultural connection, but because we are situated in the middle of this important ocean space, during the maritime Silk Road period, Sri Lanka was one of the most important stopovers. So several of Sri Lanka's ports have been major ports for Silk Road, from Gokana to Hambantota to Jaffna, all these areas. Now, because of that, Sri Lanka shares cultural connection with China. Also, there is Buddhist links. Some Buddhist monks have visited Sri Lanka during Anuradhapura period to learn Buddhism and take those morals and knowledge back to China, which facilitated the thrival of Buddhism as a religion in China. But contemporary relationship, again, there has been a hiatus between bilateral relationship between China and Sri Lanka. Because China was involved in its own domestic issues. Sri Lanka was colonized under the British. So during that period, there was no interaction. So the interaction begins after Sri Lanka gained independent in 1948, and after China, People's Republic of China was formed in 1950s. So, but again, the development was very slow when it comes to China-Sri Lanka relations as opposed to our relationship with India. So the most significant ties are that in 1952, Sri Lanka signs trade agreement, which we currently call a Rice Rubber Pact. This was signed even before Sri Lanka officially signed diplomatic relationship with China in the modern era. So, and then in 1956, Sri Lanka begins official diplomatic relationship with China. So, the most significant change in the relationship happens, I think, in early 2000s. Now, this is, at least in my opinion, this is a situation where several factors fall into place in a coincidental manner. Partly there is a financial crisis in early 2000s. There's a financial crisis in the Europe. At the same time, China is developing at a 2-digit rate, and it has massive surplus, which it want to invest in other parts of the country. China has been doing that already in Africa, but in South Asia, it began this investment drive only in early 2000s. This is partly because of that. Also, this during the same period of time, China gained the admission to World Trade Organization, which gave it more opportunity to go out and invest and engage in development partnerships with other countries. In the meantime, Sri Lanka's government changes. Mahinda Rajapaksa becomes the president, who decides to go into a military offensive against the LTT terrorism to end the war, which was protracted for over 3 decades. Now, when that happened, obviously Sri Lanka faced a lot of diplomatic pressure from the West. India was somewhat lukewarm in its response. China comes forward and provide the assistance which Sri Lanka required, both in terms of military equipment and also in the diplomatic arena. This strengthened China's relationship with China, I think, with Sri Lanka. I think that's the most important foundation that happened for the bilateral relationship. After this happened, as we know, there is significant improvement, which of course is watched with lot of anxious in India. There was a lot of skepticism of what China is doing in Sri Lanka, whether it comes for infrastructure developments like ports, airports, etc. During the same period, I think with Robert Kaplan's book on monsoon, people started talking about China coming into the Indian Ocean and the brewing US-China competition. There was also discourse about whether China is going to replace United States as the global hegemony. I think the more China started gaining attention, the more Sri Lanka also got attention because of the kind of activity that China was doing in Sri Lanka. But if you actually looked at the statistics in the early days, you see that the amount of investment that Sri Lanka has received is very less compared to Pakistan or Bangladesh. So this is a very interesting point. But I think we received more attention than those countries. Now let me give some, so with that, I would say that the competition between China and India in Sri Lanka began since 2000. So this competition can be seen in several aspects: trade and investments, development partnerships, and infrastructure in energy sector, etc. Some of these the information that I'm talking right now are part of my journal paper on how navigating, navigating China, Sri Lanka, China, India competition, how Sri Lanka does that. So for instance, when it comes to trade and investment, at least in my opinion, I would say if you look at the interaction between China and India, China, Sri Lanka, and India, Sri Lanka, China has been a catalyst for India to look at Sri Lanka differently, to engage with Sri Lanka differently, and to put more effort into the relationship. Now, as I said, we have had a very somewhat stronger trade relationship since the Rubberized Pact with China. But when it comes to 90s, this has declined a little bit. Again, it picks up only in 2000s. But even in 2004, until after 2004, China did not occupy the position as among the top 3 trading partners in Sri Lanka. In 2002, Sri Lanka's trade with China was only 2.5% of the total trade of the country. But in 2000, when you look at 2017, bilateral trade between Sri Lanka and China was 13.7%, and China emerged as the second largest trading partner behind India in 2018. In 2016, China was the top trading partner, surpassing India. Now, this is even without having a free trade agreement. With India, Sri Lanka does have a free trade agreement. With China, we do not have a free trade agreement yet. So this is very interesting because of this factor. India, as I said, so with India, we have an exclusive free trade agreement, which was signed in 1998 and came into force in 2000. So in 2002, Sri Lanka's total trade with India was only 9.3%, but by 2017, it has gone up to 16.8%. And between 2000, after Sri Lanka signed the free trade agreement, the trade between Sri Lanka and India has increased by 47%. So the interesting point for me at least is that even with that, and when we do not have such an agreement with China, Sri Lanka's trade is with China is at the second place. And with both these two countries, Sri Lanka has it's a import-based trade mostly, not export-based. Sri Lanka's exports are mostly with the Europe. I'm sure this is very this is a reality for a lot of small countries, because these are massive production houses in the world, India and China. So we will not be able to surpass them and have a trade surplus. But I think what Sri Lanka should be improving is what kind of products that we can put into these in two markets, which are the largest markets in Asia, in the world. Like in which areas that Sri Lanka can find value-added products and also advantage. So this is something I think Sri Lanka is yet to find, because we still rely mostly on tea, garments, so that our markets are always in the Europe and Russia. So usually with the trade, investment also follow. So according to Board of Investment in Sri Lanka, Colombo has received $1,660 million of FDI from China between 2002 and 2012 and 2017. And a total of 616 million was received from India for the same period of time. So both China and India are also very important foreign direct investors for Sri Lanka. They are investing in real estate, ports, and other infrastructure, energy sector, in areas like that. Now, so I think I have to mention about the competition that's happening in the port infrastructure in particular. In 2008, China Merchant Port brings a foreign direct investment to develop the southern terminal of the Colombo port, which we today call as CICT, Colombo International Container Terminal. Now, in 2018, after CEM ports came to Colombo port, it became the fastest growing port in the region, and it grew at a rate of over 16%. And today it is one of the most efficient deep water ports in this part of the region. So CEM port became a catalyst in booming the port industry in Sri Lanka. And they are the same company that invested in Hambantota and right now operating the port in Hambantota also. Now this brings Indian investment into Sri Lanka. Earlier, India didn't, even though the business was mostly with India. India did not see a potential in investing in Sri Lanka's port industry. But during the past couple of years, we saw how much India has been negotiating and trying to get a deal. We all know about the Easter Container Terminal issue that happened where in 2019, India, Japan, like together was like there was an agreement to develop the terminal, but after the government changed, there were trade union actions, after which the government decided to retract. And then now today, Western Terminal will be developed by Adani Ports. I don't think at least Adani, part of me believe that Adani Ports investment was a strategic investment. It's not purely an economic investment because the terminal sits right next to CM Port, and it is also close to the China built port city. So it is definitely a strategic investment there, partly catalyzed by Chinese involvement in the port sector. Then we also see a lot of competition happening between China and India in terms of development assistance. Again, after, India was not a main development partner for a longer period of time, but since China has come in, the loans and grants have doubled and tripled. So today, both India and China are main development partners for Sri Lanka. They are main bilateral creditors for Sri Lanka, with whom now the government is trying to restructure the debts as Sri Lanka, since the economic crisis has unfolded in Sri Lanka. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, another major area where we see the competition is between China and India is in energy sector. China built a coal power plant in Puttalam, Noruchole, and India has been trying to build a similar coal power plant in the east part of the country called in Sampur, which has not realized. Sampur is a very strategic area. It is closer to it is right at the Trincomalee Harbour. So Sri Lankan government has a lot of strategic interest in the area. And it is also, the area is believed to be very rich for agriculture work. So building a coal power plant has always received a lot of criticism from domestically among various parties. So it has not pulled through. But today we see that China has signed agreements to build hybrid power plants through renewable energies like wind power and solar power in northern part in near the Pork Strait. Now this is very interesting. This happened only in March 2022. It is interesting mainly because in December, Chinese firm already, like Sri Lanka, got a loan from ADB to build a similar plant, and Chinese firm gained the bid to develop this in the northern part. Then suddenly they pulled off from this, saying that third parties have raised security concerns. So this third party, they did not mention who, but then later when Chinese foreign minister visited Sri Lanka, he also referred to these third parties to not to get involved in the bilateral relationship between Sri Lanka and China. Now, indirectly, they're obviously referring to India. So the line of events and the chronological order is very interesting. So you see them pulling off, then India coming in, and that they have not confirmed whether they are building these power plants in the same islands, but it's just that it is in the northern part, in islands in the northern parts. I would say couple of years ago, this may not have even happened. But we see that there is strong development of bilateral ties between India and Sri Lanka during the past 2 years, 3 years, and that President Gotabaya, when he came to power, mentioned that he will be um, sensitive to India's security concerns. And you see that actually government is giving thought to that statement. So that the moment that India raises some concerns, that China has to back down, which tells something about where the bilateral relationship between Sri Lanka and India is today. This turn of events, I think, is a result of the developments mainly that happened during the pandemic period. So both India and China came forward to assist Sri Lanka during the pandemic period. Well, obviously, the when you are looking at it from a broader perspective, they both want to keep their presence in the country. So they are, whenever the one is assisting, the other comes forward. So they don't want to lose in the game. So which is obviously, in my opinion, is very welcomed in Sri Lanka because it's always a benefit. So since the pandemic happened, China has been coming out with humanitarian aid over and over again. Between March and June in 2020, China sent 3 batches of essential medical supplies, protective equipment, etc. And this has been continuing with donations of masks, diagnostic kits, PPEs, etc. In June 2020, China provided more diagnostic kits, PPE, face shields, everything that the country required in fighting pandemic. And India also did the same. India was the first country to come forward in providing these humanitarian assistance. Obviously, India is called the world's pharmaceutical factory. So they produce all these equipments, and India came forward to provide essential medicines and all those things. And Prime Minister Modi also set up this virtual conference for the South Asian countries to fight against pandemic in solidarity. Similar, now when this happened, couple of months after, China started its own virtual conference, to which out of 4 conferences, Sri Lanka has participated in 3 of them. Now, this is very interesting because you see that one country is mirroring the efforts of the other when it comes to their responses during the pandemic throughout. Similarly, when the vaccines were developed, India was the first to come forward and provide AstraZeneca. But of course, afterwards, India's demand rose quite high with the Delta variant, etc., which opened an opportunity for China to bring its own vaccine. So Sinopharm has been the main vaccine in fighting pandemic in Sri Lanka in its vaccine regime. Until Sri Lanka started the booster shot, the primary vaccine mostly was Sinopharm for majority of the population. And both countries have equally contributed to, similarly contributed to economic by providing economic assistance in terms of loans, credit lines, etc. during the past 2 years. However, I see that there is strong and active engagement of India since Sri Lanka's economic crisis broke in early this year. Now, China's response since the beginning has been a little bit lukewarm. perhaps this was because of some of the diplomatic issues that happened towards the latter part of 2020 with some issue with the fertilizer company, then retracting the solar power project, etc. Whereas India has taken this as an opportunity to establish itself as the closest partner for Sri Lanka. Indian Foreign Minister has been very vocal in IMF discussions, providing supporting Sri Lanka's cause. And I think India is using this opportunity to emphasize that it is also the closest neighbor and also a major partner, that it is there when Sri Lanka needed. Because one of the criticisms India has always gone in the past is that India plays the role of big brother and try to get involved in domestic politics and do not support Sri Lanka in diplomatic arena when it's required. So since the economic crisis happened, there was which turned into a huge political crisis in Sri Lanka. We see that official Indian position has been to stay out of what's happening domestically and provide economic assistance where necessarily and talk on behalf of Sri Lanka diplomatically. So it is doing what China has been doing in the past, and I think it has been a very successful effort because it has strengthened the bilateral relationship between Sri Lanka and India. Now, I will conclude with how this has helped Sri Lanka. In my opinion, from the beginning, I said at the beginning also I said small states are always viewed through the perspective of great powers and how they view small countries. And in generally, it is believed that when you are a small country situated in the middle of a power rivalry between two countries or many players, you have to either align or bandwagon in your relationship. But I don't think Sri Lanka has ever done that in the past. Instead, what they do is similar to what some of the Southeast Asian countries do when it comes to US-China rivalry. That is strategic hedging. You hedge your bets with all players and you take the maximum advantage of what's happening. So exactly that's what Sri Lanka has been doing when it comes to China and India competition. So that's why I said the competition is necessarily not disadvantages for Sri Lanka. It has provided a lot of opportunities to realize Sri Lanka's economic and political interest, foreign policy interest. But having said that, it does not mean that it is not challenging, because it's a very tight rope that you have to carefully balance. You will always get a lot of criticisms. The moment you do something, internationally you will be viewed differently. And at least as the status quo continues, Sri Lanka will be able to continue this strategic hedging. But if the current competition develops into a full-blown war or something, then Sri Lanka will be put in a difficult situation. So from a Sri Lankan perspective, therefore, I believe while the strategic hedging is very interesting between China and India, it is very important for Sri Lanka to bring other partners also into play without being overly dependent on these parties. Because otherwise, if Sri Lanka was forced to make a choice in the future, it will be at a loss. So in order to avoid that, I think promoting multilateral partnerships, unilateral partnerships with other players, and bringing a lot of similar small countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Southeast Asian countries, which are more developed than Sri Lanka, into Sri Lanka's foreign policy framework is very important for Sri Lanka's future.
Thank you. Could we then come up with some interactions with some questions? It was really, what should I say, eye-opener for me when you had to mention certain things which you are viewing as a Sri Lankan, which perhaps we did not explore all this time as academics and as uh, members of the civil society. Okay, because most of us are driven through whatever official statements are at the diplomatic levels. So I have a few questions,
Yes.
and I know you have covered almost whatever were my queries, but even then I have a few questions. I would say that what, according to your opinion, if you could just identify two challenges or two opportunities of China's presence in Sri Lanka. Two challenges.
Challenges and opportunities. Opportunities, of course, one of the direct economic benefit that China brings into Sri Lanka, the Sri Lanka, because there is a huge demand for when it comes to infrastructure development. There is a huge demand and a necessity in Sri Lanka, but we know that not every country can provide the amount of money that small countries need for those developments. So obviously, the direct economic benefit that brings the relationship is very important. The fact that also that the this open Sri Lanka a huge market in China, even though we are yet to find how to explore it. For years, Sri Lankan economists have studied the relationship, and they propose that there are certain areas where Sri Lanka can take maximum advantage from the Chinese market. So these are the direct advantage. Indirectly, I think the how China plays the role of a catalyst, whether it is for India or for United States or any other country, or even for Japan, Chinese presence itself make these countries to view Sri Lanka as a different player in this international system. So the way they want to engage with Sri Lanka is different. Couple of years ago, United States usually approach Sri Lanka from the Indian perspective, India's lens. But today, at least to a certain extent, US sees Sri Lanka as it is when it tries to engage with Sri Lanka as a maritime player through different inviting Sri Lanka for impact exercise in 2018, um, making constant visits, naval visits to Sri Lanka, proposing a security of forces agreement in 2018-2019 period. All these things, I think, because they know that China is there, they do not want to lose this important strategic position, the place of Sri Lanka. So they are more interested in Sri Lanka because of that. If you look, even if you do a search in Google Scholar, Sri Lanka's academic perspective on Sri Lanka is either about civil war and related literature, or about China and how it is doing whatever in Sri Lanka right now. So that itself tells that how China plays a role as a catalyst. I think that is an advantage. So challenges, of course, the because of this, the challenges that comes from that relation, that equation. Because China is there, we get unwanted attention also. For instance, if, as I said, Hambantota port has been in Sri Lanka's policy agenda for a longer period of time. But because China gave the loan and because China was involved in building it, even before it came into existence, it, uh, it attracted a lot of negative marketing. Same goes with the port city. Port city is viewed through the prism of China rather than looking at it as an investment platform. This happens not just internationally, it happens domestically also. So domestic perspective sometimes overly influenced by the international discourse, then these kind of discussions happen domestically also, rather than looking at these projects or activities individually as opportunities or requirements for Sri Lanka's developments. They are always looked through geopolitical lens. So that is a major challenge for Sri Lanka in going forward. Like the very fact that the presence, in one hand, it push attract the other countries to engage with Sri Lanka differently. It also attracts unnecessary, unwanted attention and create um, different discourses.
If I could just have another query related to this, what about the challenge so far as debt crisis is concerned?
Sorry?
Because of China's presence, do you have any debt crisis?
Okay, so this is a question I have been asked these days continuously. So Sri Lanka's current economic crisis and debt crisis is not completely a Chinese creation. It was more to do with the misplaced policies of Sri Lanka's government, economic mismanagement for decades, and within the last decade and a half or so, due to commercial borrowing. So after Sri Lanka moved after Sri Lanka moved into a middle income country, the most of the concessional grants and loan opportunities are not available for middle income countries. So in order to get what is required, investments, what is required for Sri Lanka went for the capital market. And this capital borrowing has been at exponentially high rates for projects that has low return or short, like it takes long term for these returns to come. So I think this whole China debt again is something that was created in the international strategic circle. For the past so many years, Sri Lankan economists have been trying to discredit this statement. But even now, I think by the time Sri Lankans came forward, it was too late. The perspective has been established. Right now, Sri Lanka 40, yes, for over 49 or 51% of Sri Lanka's debt is with the capital market. Then it's the second largest debt is for the ADB. Japan and China have almost similar amount, like 10% each. Then it comes India. So now as Sri Lanka is negotiating a deal with IMF for a financial package, we have to negotiate debt restructuring. So India, China, and Japan are the bilateral partners with whom Sri Lanka is doing this debt restructuring discussions.
Okay, I understand. Okay, and then this leads me to another one. That is, what is your take on the Sri Lankan perspective on Bay of Bengal?
Right.
And is there any possibility of emerging alliances with other littoral states? Okay, maybe that so that the region can be a better zone of peace. Okay, I was also thinking if you could highlight a little bit of the Buddhist ties and regional integration, which can emerge if you have some presence and some active participation in the Bay of Bengal region.
Right. So actually, my understanding about the Buddhist ties, when we talk about Bay of Bengal region, I think Buddhist ties are mostly with Thailand, Myanmar, those countries. And to be honest, I have not studied in depth into this. My knowledge is very minimal. But engaging with the Bay of Bengal region through BIMSTEC has been a priority for Sri Lanka's foreign policy for so many years. Prior to this recent change of leadership in BIMSTEC, Sri Lanka was the chair for BIMSTEC for 2 years. And in March, we had the BIMSTEC conference where for the head of the governments in order for the chairmanship to be changed. So I in early 2006, if I'm not wrong, Sri Lanka proposed the idea of troika, where the past chair, present chair, and the future chair will be together forming a committee in leading the BIMSTEC initiative. So because of that, for the next 2 years, also I think Sri Lanka will be more involved in the leadership in leading the BIMSTEC initiative. Apart from that, Sri Lanka is also the lead country for information technology initiative cluster. So Sri Lanka will be doing a lot along with that line. Obviously you might know that Sri Lanka has a very high literacy rate, and our information technology expertise is also rising quite well. So I think Sri Lanka is trying to take this opportunity of leading the cluster on information technology to get investment and benefit for countries' service in the industry.
One last question maybe, that is just now, we have understood and we are just looking into what is happening in Sri Lanka just now. So I felt that will there be a continuity of Sri Lankan foreign policy vis-a-vis India and China after the recent crisis? What is your perception on that?
Excuse
me, could you give me both the versions? Officially, what would be at the governmental level, will there be a change? And what is the perception of the common people?
Well, government level, Sri Lanka has always stick to the policy of non-alignment. And recently, they use different words from time to time. They use equidistant foreign policy, non-alignment, neutrality, etc. But I think the general understanding is that you will not be tilt towards one player or the other. And as I said, from what we see also, that's what actually that has been happening. It's more like using your opportunity, playing one over the other and getting advantage of it. So most probably this will continue. When it comes to public's perception, I would say like Sri Lankans are in general very averse to any foreign nation getting too involved in the country. Perhaps it is because of our colonial past. Whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's United States, whoever they think there is too much presence or influence in the country, they are averse to it. A couple of years ago, they were very welcoming. Public opinion was very welcoming of China because they did not see China as a strong presence. But now it has changed a little bit. With regard to India, Sri Lankans always have that somewhat distant, skeptical perception. Again, because of the historical relations, India was the only country who has invaded Sri Lanka multiple times in the history during Chola period, etc. And then during the LTT terrorism period, there has been certain incidents that created this sort of skepticism. And of course, India is a bigger player sitting next door. So with all that and the strategic consciousness of people of being a small state, with all that, they have always been little apprehensive of India's involvement too much. So that I would say, with whoever, it will continue the same way. The next day, say the United States become more and more involved than how much they are now. They will receive the same kind of averseness from Sri Lankan public.
Okay. It was wonderful talking to you, Chulani. So I will now wind up because it has been a very lengthy one, but I didn't want to end it just now. I wanted to continue, but then I know that in spite of your very busy schedule, you have taken some time out of that and you have been with us. So it was really wonderful. So I thank you. Officially, let me thank you, Dr. Attanayake. It has been truly very enlightening session, and I'm sure Indian scholars, researchers, young researchers and young scholars will definitely, after viewing your presentation, they will be open to new avenues, to rethink and to explore areas which has largely remained absent from our perspective, So I think Geetika Trust, because it encourages, and as I was telling you that recently, we are thinking in terms of more micro-level research where people-to-people contacts to create a better atmosphere, a better South Asia, more secure South Asia. That is also our objective. So promoting a kind of a research culture amongst the younger researchers in India. I think this will be really, this is a very enlightening session and a thought-provoking one. So once again, thank you. And thank you for all your presentation and all your data and your detailed work. And I wish you all success and more creative and more productive research work in future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad that I was able to provide a different perspective. I hope we keep in touch. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All the best.